can't see full 360. We can't see 180 degrees, right? We can see 180 degrees with our peripheral vision. We can't see the other 180 degrees. That other 180 degrees is what other people can see. And that's why it can be so valuable to do what's called a 360-degree review with somebody.
Yeah, what other people, meaning everybody and everything and all dimensions and all times can see that.
That's right.
It's not just like, oh, well, my wife can see everything behind me. Well, she can see some things.
Well, that's right.
It's the full perspective.
It's the full perspective. And thank goodness, I've had experiences like that. I had a 360-degree review when I was in my 30s. And I remember going through it the first time. It didn't feel very good. It would put me in a place of discomfort. I'll say that much. It was like an executive training type thing. And my peers were supposed to give me a review.
Yeah.
And I was always good with the people that were my subordinates in my management teams, the people that were reporting into me directly doing reviews. And I always tended to do pretty well with them. I always did well with my bosses. But where I didn't do as well was with my peers. Right? Because they would sometimes feel threatened or whatever. I don't know.
Sure.
Right? But I wasn't even aware of it. That's the point.
Yeah.
You don't know what you don't know. I went back to MBA school when I went back to MBA school because I felt like, I was already more senior in my career path. And I said, but I still want to go back to MBA school because I don't feel like I know what I don't know. So maybe if I go back to MBA school in the world of business, I'll at least learn the limit of my knowledge.
Right.
Right. And we have this word, it's a fancy word, entropy, which means chaos, right? Randomness. I don't really believe in randomness, but let's just say that this word exists. And the definition of the word is not truly well understood or well defined. Probably the best way to define it is the boundary of where knowledge ends and ignorance begins. That's entropy. So it's the zone of we don't know what we don't know. So when it comes to our own personalities and our personas and our subconscious minds, by definition, it's in the zone of we don't know what we don't know. So life, I believe, is about us learning to transcend through this polarized perception of vision, seeing the world around us, learning to replace judgment of others with love and acceptance. Because that is tantamount for us to be able to feel the same way and look at ourselves with that same love and acceptance.
It's two ways that you can go. You can go in through love and acceptance for all parts of yourself, what you would typically call shadow work, although that term is, I think, mischaracterized a lot, because ultimately the shadow is that which you cannot see. So you have to have some process where you can illuminate that which you cannot see.
That's
which
the
often
seeing what
involves
the
other
limit
people.
of we used to always say in business, right? It's like, I didn't know anything. I couldn't find my ass with both hands, right? That's kind of the saying we would say for someone who's a newbie in a space or category industry. And you kind of have to learn that zone or even what the context of that learning would be to be able to reference it to yourself.
Right.
And that is what shadow work ultimately starts off with.
Yep. So it's either internal work or external work, working on, you hear the stories of different spiritual teachers who have that person that's the hardest for them to love on their altar because they're using the external to learn how to actually love the wholeness of themselves as the universe in a drop rather than a drop in the universe, kind of changing the Rumi quote around a little bit. One thing that comes up, so many things, so many paths I want to discuss with you here. One thing that comes up that I've noticed recently is, and I say this in like the past year or so, but I've seen it actually play out over time, is there's a quote from Nietzsche, and I don't have the words exactly, but, basically saying, be careful, stare into the abyss, and the abyss stares back at you, right? And I've seen people who've been really focused, not necessarily incorrectly so, although sometimes hyperbolically so, exaggerating the darkness, but looking at the darkness which has exposed itself in the world over the last 2 years. But they've looked so deeply into that darkness, so consistently, every day, every different article, every different way that they can look into the darkness. I've seen the darkness start to creep inside them, inside their own psyche, inside their own, and they're actually in this field, like you were saying, of resonance, where their own judgment and what they're looking at is then starting to actually change their characteristics themselves. And I think this is something to be really mindful of for all of us. Like, be careful staring into the abyss and only the abyss for too long, because it will start to change your very nature. You'll start to become in resonance with the abyss itself.
Do you remember, I think it was I can remember if it was Batman Begins or The Dark Knight. I think it's The Dark Knight, where the guy that played Two-Face, you may remember this, and it was in the one with Christian Bale as Batman. And there's a quote in it where he says, "Hope that you live long enough to defeat the villain, but not so long that you become the villain."
Yeah, he says that to Batman.
He says it. I can't remember who he says it to. I just remember it's like this scene.
Wow.
It's like when his face got half burned off type of thing.
Yeah.
And I find that fascinating because again, it's this concept of we start off and we all have sort of somewhat of a vigilante in each of us, right? We want to do the right things.
And which is also based on the hubris that we feel like we see everything better than everybody else and we should be the arbiter of justice.
Totally.
So let's get on Twitter and fuck that person up for what they said.
No, I saw
we know what they meant.
I have a perfect example of this week. I have a friend who is super aware and super conscious. And she basically posts on positive stuff all the time. And so this guy goes on her page and he starts saying that she is representing 100% toxic positivity.
That's a good one.
I'm like, toxic positivity. Okay, so let me just grok that for just one moment, right? Toxic positivity. And the first thing that I had to do is, of course, I wanted to go to his page to see what was on his profile. And the first thing that it says is defender of the oppressed and weak. So this is kind of illustrating my point, right? Which is at a certain point, we can become the imp of the perverse and not even realize that it happened to us.
The perverse, indeed.
Right? We all want to be the hero, but don't realize that when we start to press our view of the world on the rest of the world around us, then it can take on kind of a very different feel, which becomes one of negativity. As you said, when you go in the cave of the person you're judging, you take on the characteristics of that cave.
Yeah.
You can't help but be sympathetically in resonance with that cave.
Yeah.
And what we just experienced, right, where we had this beautiful song and everything, that put us in a resonance of heart space, right?
Yeah.
Which is I'm still trying to pull myself out of right now. Thank you.